In this video, we're going to talk about for loops, which are like while loops, but their syntax is a little more concise, and the way you have to write them makes it a little harder to make an infinite loop. So we'll start off by going over our while loop syntax and converting that to for loops. So remember, the three parts of our while loop are a counter, so we'll go ahead and make a counter, which will be a number, and we'll set that equal to 0. And then we have our while statement, which we have a Boolean expression for the condition that will keep looping. So we'll go ahead and say while I is less than 5. And then we have our while body, where it does something. So let's go ahead and print this string counting plus our counter. And we have our incrementer, which all we do is, in this case, I++. Great. So we just made a while loop. We printed counting 0 to 4. And that was great, but that took up a lot of space. So with a for loop, you can write all of these conditions in one line. So let's talk about how we do that. First, we just write a keyword called for. So you just say for, and then we have parentheses. And in these parentheses, we're going to have the counter, the Boolean expression for the condition that we'll keep looping in, and then our incrementer at the end. So we'll say I is a number, and we're going to set that equal to 0. Just like we declared it in the while loop. Then we'll say so long as I is less than 5, semicolon in between each of these three items. Lastly, I++. Close the parentheses, make these big brackets just like you're going in the body of a while statement, and now we do that. We do the something that we did in our while statement. So we're going to print counting plus I. And we don't need to add an incrementer to the end, because the for statement will do the I++ after it's run the body, just like the while statement would do it at the end or the last line of your while loop. Great, so we have the same exact items printed when we run the for loop as we did with the while loop. So for loops are really useful for filter, map, and reduce functions that are built in to TypeScript libraries, so we're going to talk about that in the next video. But for now, we're going to play around a little bit more with how to use for loops in fun ways, particularly to make a recipe book for dummies. And since it's fall, we're going to make pumpkin spice cookies.
Alright, I love pumpkin spice cookies because it's fall time, so we're going to make a recipe book that tells us how to make pumpkin spice cookies. But let's think about recipes. So recipes have some instructions, but I don't know how to cook at all. So I need a recipe book for dummies that tells me every single instruction as many times as I want. So normal recipes books just say, add 1 1/4 cup of sugar. But that math is really hard for me to do in my head, so I need my recipe book for dummies to say, add 1/4 cup sugar 5 times. That just tells me the actions that I need to do to make my cookies. So that's kind of a repetitive task that we want to do in our program, which makes it a great opportunity to use our new concept of for loops. So we're going to make an add ingredient function that we can use to tell me how to add an ingredient to our recipe. So say we use that example, I have to add 1 1/4 cup of sugar. We want to make a function that however many times I need in order to fulfill that recipe instruction, it tells me to add a 1/4 cup of sugar. So let's implement this add ingredient function. So we'll say function add ingredient, and this function takes in 3 parameters. The first one is the actual ingredient we want to add, which will be a string. The second one is the amount of that ingredient we want to add, which will also be a string. And the third one is the number of times that this instruction needs to be printed to the screen, which will be a number. And since this function is just printing things out, the return type will be void. So let's go inside the body of our function now, and we want to print add however much of the ingredient, the number of times that we need to, which we get from the times parameter. So we'll use a for loop. So we'll say for, and inside the parentheses we'll initialize a counter, so let I be a number, and that gets the value 0. And then a semicolon, and the thing that comes next is the Boolean expression that we want to keep looping until that expression evaluates to false. So since we want to loop times number of times, we'll say I is less than times. And we'll put a semicolon, and then we want to put our incrementer, I++, which just means increment I by 1, And remember, that'll be the very last thing that happens in our for loop. Great, so now we have a loop that will run the number of times that we have passed in as the times parameter, and inside the body of the for loop, we can print out the instruction. So we'll say print the word add with a space, and then we'll concatenate onto that the amount, the measurement parameter that we have, and then onto that we'll concatenate a space, and then we'll concatenate the ingredient parameter. So if we pass in, 1/4 cup and sugar as our parameters, our function should print out add 1/4 cup of sugar, and because this is inside the for loop, it'll print that out however many number of times we tell it to. Great, so now that we have our add ingredient function, we can actually implement this recipe function. So we'll make a new function that's called print cookie recipe. And that function will take in no parameters, and since again all we're doing is printing or calling other functions, the return type will be void. And inside our function body, now we can call our add ingredient function. So the first instruction, according to Betty Crocker, of making pumpkin spice cookies is to add 1/4 cup of butter. So we'll call our add ingredient function, and as the ingredient we'll pass in butter, then as the amount we'll pass in 1/4 cup, and we want that to happen 3 times. So the Betty Crocker tells us to add 3/4 cup of butter. So we want to add 1/4 cup of butter 3 times. And if we run our code now, we should see that our recipe book for dummies has told us to add 1/4 cup of butter 3 times. Alright, so now we're going to paste in the rest of the instructions for making pumpkin spice cookies. And if we run it, we should see our full cookbook for dummies recipe. And this is an actual recipe, so if you want to make pumpkin spice cookies, bake on 375 degrees for 10-15 minutes. And we'll see you in the next video.